All right, we're doing lesson 47, book 3, beginning rock guitar. Now, this is a theory lesson um, talking about a major key of C, C major, and the scale is, I think I've shown you this scale before. But what we're going to talk about is how uh, chords, like a regular C chord, is derived from scale tones. Now, if we number the scale tones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say just 1 to 5, and we skip every other note in odd numbers 1, 3, 5, then we're skipping in thirds. Now, I can harmonize the scale up sort of the length of the fretboard in thirds, and we have a pattern of major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, minor, major. And that's actually for another lesson, but that's basically what chords are built in thirds. And if you put a third on top of a third, then you have what we call a triad, and that's tones 1, 3, 5. Or within the triad, it's called the root, which is 1, root, third, fifth. Okay? Now, in chords, we can keep going up in odd numbers, and that becomes like if you've heard of jazz chords like a G 13th chord or a C ninth chord or a C major ninth. You're going in odd numbers. So after 1, 3, 5, and then, also, you've probably seen like G7. What does a 7 mean? What does it mean? That's the next odd number beyond the triad. So we have the triad, which is 1, 3, 5, and then we go to the next odd number, which is 7. So if I play up to the seventh tone of the major scale, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and I skip every other tone, C, E, G, B, I'm playing a seventh chord. It's C, E, G, B. And that's kind of a jazz chord on the 1 chord. It's called the 1 chord if you're in the key of C and you're building a 7th chord off the first tone, C. Now, what's a little bit confusing is that, again, the triad is 1, 3, 5, or we call it the root, third, fifth. The second tone of the C scale, you could build a triad off of that tone, and that's tones 2, 4, 6. But within that triad, we still call this the root, third, and fifth of the what we call the second chord of the key is the 2 chord. So if we number each tone of the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if we build a triad off of each of those chords, we call them the 1 chord, the 2 chord, and I should tell you what the quality of those chords are. It's major, and then minor, and then minor off the 3 chord. The 4 chord is major. The 5 chord is major. The 6 chord is minor. The 7 chord is sort of the oddball. It's a diminished chord, which is not, it's nothing complicated, but it's still a triad. And then major. And that's the 1 chord again. So you have the 1, the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, the 7, and then back to 1. And the qualities are major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. So in the sheets in the book, that's the second page of this lesson. All the chords can be built off any scale tone, and not just the first. And the chords are identified usually with Roman numerals. Like the 1 chord would be Roman numeral 1, the 2 chord would be a small case Roman numeral with a 2, and then a 3, and then a 4, and a 5, and so on. So that's just the way we usually identify them. Now, if you remember, again, it's major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. There are actually 3 different major chords. I played 4, but I played the 1 chord again an octave higher. So the 1 chord, C, C, E, G, and the 4 chord, which is F, A, C, that's the next major chord, and then the 5 chord off the 5th tone of the scale. Actually, I'm going to play the 4 chord here, F, A, C. It's the same notes, but it works better if we're just doing the primary chords. These are the primary chords, are the 3 major chords. 1, 4, 5, 1. And basically that's any common folk song or early country songs were just 1, 4, 5 chords. Like in the key of C, it's C, F, G, and usually you play them more C, F, or you could do thumb in the bass, and then G and C. And those, are so many songs are built off those main primary chords. And 4 chord, 5 chord, 1. You've heard this kind of thing, right? Now the 5 chord is what we call that's the dominant note of the key, and if we can make that a 7th chord, it's like a flat 7th that resolves back to the 1 in a stronger way. If we play a G7, which is a 5 chord, to a 1, and so the chord, the major chord built off the 5th tone of the scale. Again, if we number the tones, 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is a major chord, but 5 is called the dominant note. And if we make that a 7 within the triad, think odd numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7. That's the dominant 7th chord that resolves to the 1 chord. I'm doing a bar chord now. But those are the primary chords. And talking about 7th chords, the major chord, which is our 1 chord, if we make it a 7th and we don't alter the tones of the scale, it's going to be a major 7th. And I think I referred to that earlier in the lesson, but and that's kind of a jazz chord. You don't hear that in rock. You do hear in rock music sometimes, like the Beatles' George Harrison song, "Something in the Way She Moves," like C chord and then a C major 7th. And then what he does is he does a C dominant 7th. And that's a 5 chord or a dominant 5 chord to F. And so it's interesting. The Beatles were very sophisticated in their chord changes. By the time George wrote Something, that was, I think, on the one of the last 3 Beatles albums. I can't remember if it's on the White Album or if it's on I think it's on Abbey Road. But it was a great song. But it has a major 7th in it. So if you make 7ths out of the 1 chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, and then the 4 chord, 1, 3, 5, 7, That's also what we call a major seventh chord. But the 5 chord is 1, 3, 5, 7. The seventh is a whole step from the octave. That's a dominant seventh. So it still may be confusing, but it needs probably further study. But there are different qualities of seventh chords. Okay? So that's basically this lesson. You've got harmony, you've got a major scale, and chords are derived from the major scale by skipping every other tone of the scale in thirds. And when we put a third on top of a third, that's called a triad. And if we put a third on top of a third on top of a third, that's a seventh chord. And then another third on top of that, it's a ninth chord. And then an 11th chord. And then a 13th chord. Okay? And that's, I'm doing a major seventh. So a flat seventh would be a dominant seventh chord. Blues is all dominant seventh chords. And blues, the chords in blues do not follow a major scale. So, because if you're in the key of C in blues, you'll do a dominant seventh, and then the 4 chord is a dominant seventh, and then the 5 chord, G7, is a dominant seventh. Now that chord falls, again, it's the 5 chord, which is a dominant seventh. It falls naturally in the major scale of C, but you can't do a flat seventh on the 4 chord and the 1 chord and call it a major scale. So it's a little bit confusing, but hopefully as you study theory and understand things better, it's like a big Chinese puzzle, and then all of a sudden everything becomes clear. And sometimes if you look at it from a different angle, you'll see different facets. It's like a diamond, you know. You'll see different facets as you look in from different angles. And we're just getting one piece at a time for music theory. When you've had a lot of the pieces together, eventually it comes together and you understand it. So, but it is a bit confusing. And I hopefully I didn't totally confuse you here. We're just talking about how a major scale becomes chord, and you can build a chord off any note of the major scale. You know, it's like the Sound of Music. Do, sorry, do, a dear, a theme, a dear, you know, so you're building chords off of each tone of the scale. And you have major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, major. So, and that's true of any key. If I do a different key, it's still within that key, it's the same relation of chords. Okay? So a little bit of confusing theory here. And so if you got something out of this, you should try to get the sheets or get my third book, and then you'll understand it better because it's on the sheets. Please press like and subscribe, and look for John Hedger Guitar Studio on YouTube here, and also on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much.